Welcome back to Lend Me Your Ears. This is Chapter 6, Section 11, Ferdinand Cortez's Voyage. Although several of the Spaniards' expeditions to America proved very unsuccessful at first, they still undertook them afresh and with renewed courage. Ferdinand Sotis, though he landed 500 men in Florida, brought no treasure from there, only he cut off the hands of 15 princes, because they would not discover their mines of gold. Yet far worse success had Pamphilus Narvaez, who lost both his fleet and men, saving only 10 out of 600 in the River Palma, and they also afterwards died there or ate one another to satisfy their raging hunger. But much better was the fortune of Ferdinand Cortez, who sailed from Spain to America in the year 1519. He had the command given to him over 10 stout ships and 3 frigates with 500-foot soldiers, and an additional force of 16 horsemen raised by the new Spanish inhabitants on Cuba. With these forces landing on the island of Cozumel, he prohibited human sacrifice to their idols and erected a cross with the image of the Virgin Mary in one of their temples. He also released Hieronymus Aquilaris after 7 years of slavery, having suffered shipwreck with Valdivia. At that time, some who saved themselves in the boat were driven by the current for 30 days to Yucatan, which time 7 died of hunger. The rest, upon going ashore, were immediately sacrificed by the natives to their gods or zemes, among the 6 who remained alive and were to be offered in the same manner the next day. Aquilaris, who, with his companions, broke prison and fled the following night. Here Cortez sent articles of peace to Taxmaras, the king of the country, but he slighted his offer and came down upon him into the field with 40,000 men drawn from the city of Potonchanan, which contained over 20,000 houses, all built of stone. And indeed the Spaniards would have seen their last day here had Cortez not drawn the enemy under his cannons by feigning an advantage and sent his small party of horses to flank the rear. As soon as they fired their cannons, causing great destruction, the front line was routed, and the rear was terrified by the noise and smoke of the guns. They also broke when charged by the horsemen, who were so fearsome to them as they had never seen horses or such cavalry tactics before. Short time, the entire army was completely scattered, and the triumphant conquerors took possession of the empty city of Potonchanam, where they stayed and enjoyed themselves for a whole month. From there they sailed to Colvaca, where, at the request of the natives, they established a colony. Among the presents given to the Spaniards were some of their own volumes, books with leaves made of the innermost rind of a tree and a kind of paste made from their meal, glued together. The characters were arranged at intervals, one after another, like our alphabet or A, B, C. Cortez was amazed to behold their magnificent temples, the floors of which were covered with embroidered tapestries adorned with precious stones. Great multitudes flocked to the temples, zealous to perform their devotions. When their seed is planted or reaches full growth, they offer young children to their zemes, idols, richly clothed after having been fattened for weeks. When they lack children, they kill their slaves, and in the absence of slaves, they appease the zemes with dog. They worship the victims that are to be sacrificed with great adoration, bowing and paying respect to them. Their zeal for idol worship is evident from a strange custom observed by them when they enter their temple. They either draw blood from their tongues, lips, ears, breasts, knees, or the palms of their hands, which they throw into the air, believing that they will be pardoned by their indulgent gods. In the city of Zempoala, Cortez found 5 slaves who were to be sacrificed the next day. However, he released them upon the insistent request of the Quines, priests, and promises of great ransoms. The priests told him that if the offerings were not continued, the zemes would spoil all their seed and plants that year. Despite being promised all happiness in the afterlife by their priest and given great assurance of it, the prisoners were not eager and returned, unwilling to suffer even though it was a profitable sacrifice. At the feet of the zemes hung numerous bundles of men's bones, and beneath them were written the names of their enemies whose flesh had either been sacrificed or eaten. 12 leagues beyond Zempoala, Cortez built a new city near the Grijalva River and called it Veracruz. Diego Velázquez took offense at this action, as it was with several presents and overtures of peace, which were indeed only spies to determine where they could best attack. Cortez mistrusted them, and soon being informed of the whole plan, he cut off the spies' hands and sent them back to Huehuetenango with defiance. In response, the Indians immediately set out and took advantage of the ensuing night to launch a fierce attack on the Spaniards. However, The Spaniards, aware of the plan in advance, were well prepared to receive them, unable to withstand such intense resistance. Indians quickly retreated and abandoned the enterprise entirely. Encouraged by these victories, Cortés pursued them and stormed Tlaxcala that same night, a city with over 20,000 houses, which he captured in a few hours. This city was intricately built with baked stones and was a major trading hub. The marketplaces were bustling with buyers and sellers, exchanging provisions such as fish, meat, bread, feathers, pearls, embroidered tapestries, chalk, stones, timber, and herb. Cortés stayed here for 20 days to refresh his army, before marching to the nearby city of Quirutical with the auxiliary forces of the Tlaxcalans, numbering over 100,000. They informed him that the people of Quirutical had barricaded their streets, piled heaps of stones on their rooftops, and filled their upper rooms with archers, prepared for both offense and defense. However, Cortés paid little heed to this warning because he was conducted into the city with all their formalities of singing and playing drums, tambos, and he was courteously welcomed everywhere. Meanwhile, Montezuma had raised a large army, not only to defend his borders, but also to surprise the Spaniards while they stayed in that city. The townspeople had invited Montezuma there for their rescue and his own defense, but the plot was accidentally discovered by a Churutane woman, advised one of her friends who followed Cortés to escape immediately because all the strangers would be destroyed within a few hours. The friend informed Cortés, who then requested all the magistrates of the city to come and speak with him. As soon as they entered the hall where he was, Cortés commanded his men to shoot them to death. The terrible rumor spread, and upon hearing the gunfire, the city erupted into chaos. Armed themselves and gathered from all places, engaging in a fierce conflict that lasted 5 hours. Eventually, exhausted and losing hope of success, they requested a ceasefire and finally reached a peace agreement with the Spaniards. This news of Montezuma's revealed intention startled him, and he believed it was better to abandon the plan and seek Cortés's favor through gifts. Therefore, he sent 15,000 richly adorned cotton garments, 10 large gold chargers, and some wine vessels, requesting Cortés to temporarily halt his intentions of marching to Tenochtitlan, his capital city. Montezuma proposed that they negotiate an accommodation during this time. However, although Cortés accepted the gifts, he maintained his resolution to continue marching. 8 leagues from Tenochtitlan, he saw the double-spired mountain Popocatépetl, named after the smoke that continually rises from its top. Popoca means a smoke, and Tepicu means a mountain. The smoke rises upright and with so much strength that even in the strongest wind it does not deviate one bit from ascending directly upwards. 10 Spaniards resolved to climb to its forked summit, but when they had barely reached halfway, they were forced to turn back due to the knee-deep ashes. However, 2 more determined individuals conquered all those difficulties and reached the top. They estimated that the mouth of the cave measured 4 miles in circumference. The trembling of the mountain and the roaring flames, which frequently burst forth, terrified them greatly, so they did not stay there for long. As we mentioned, not only did the ground tremble beneath them, but the fiery abyss expelled large stones that fell on all sides of the mountain, rolling to the bottom. Without a doubt, they would have perished there if they had not quickly run to a nearby hollow hill. From there, they eventually rejoined the rest of their company, where they were admired by the Indians for their undaunted resolve and presented with several valuable gifts. These Indians had a tradition that this was the Tophet designated for the torment of wicked and poorly governing princes. Cortés successfully traversed the humble territory of the Guazozinjas and endured severe cold on the mountains. He then discovered Amaquamaca, the principal city of the Chalco province, situated on a large lake. They rode to the city in boats called acales by the inhabitants. Continuing from there, he received a courteous welcome in Iztapalapa, another city boasting over 8,000 stone buildings, along with magnificent palaces featuring spacious rooms, delightful gardens, and ponds teeming with fish and covered with numerous birds. From Iztapalapa, a broad causeway or roadway crossed over both land and water, leading to Tenochtitlan. This causeway has several bridges that can be drawn up in times of war. Underneath the causeway, water flows from a salt lake to a freshwater lake, which experiences tides despite being situated between high mountains and 70 leagues from the sea. On both sides of this 10-league long causeway, 3 large towns, namely Mesiqualizingo, Culvacingo, Culvacana, and Huichilobusco, are all populous and well built. Culvacana benefits greatly from the salt lake as the water, conveyed into the city through pipes, forms a scum in all the places and cisterns. This scum, when coagulated by the sun and boiled, becomes salt, which they trade extensively. Since salt is not available anywhere else, foreign merchants come there for supply. Cortes, during his march within 1.5 leagues of Tenochtitlan, was greeted by Montezuma, who came accompanied by 1,000 of his nobles. They approached like pilgrims, barefoot and bowing, kissing the ground with their right hands before greeting Cortes. Montezuma himself appeared next, placing a chain of gold adorned with pearls around Cortes's neck. He then led him to the city, where, upon entering the palace, Montezuma seated Cortes on a golden throne and surrendered his right to the Catholic majesty of Spain in the presence of all his peers, causing great astonishment. However, while everything seemed to be going well beyond their expectations, Cortes received information that King Colcapoca had planned an attack on the new city of Veracruz and had treacherously murdered 2 of the garrison members, while injuring 2 others. Seizing this opportunity and using the pretext of treason and breach of contract, Cortes placed Montezuma under custody, despite Montezuma having cleared himself of any involvement in the conspiracy by capturing Colcapoco, his sons, and 15 of his peers, who were later burned to death with green wood by Cortes's command. Montezuma's attempts to reconcile with Cortes were in vain, as nothing he did could satisfy him. Nevertheless, he continued to oblige Cortes with additional favors, which I will elaborate on in more detail as they deserve attention. Montezuma's high-ranking officials were visibly discontented because, without any resistance or consideration, he had allowed a handful of strangers to dominate his entire dominion. As a result of his weakness and timidity, he was now a prisoner treated like a common criminal, despite having previously governed such vast territories. One of the concerned princes was Catumazin, the governor of the Hacolvacan province, if he had not been surprised and attacked the night before by Montezuma's revelation and discovery, he would have jeopardized all of Cortes's accomplishments. However, fortune continued to favor the Spaniards, granting them remarkable advantages. Silver and gold flowed incessantly like rivers from all directions, and their only challenge was figuring out where and how to dispose of it. Nonetheless, they remained wary of Montezuma's forces, potentially overpowering theirs, despite his imprisonment. This is evident from the grandeur of his imperial city, Tenochtitlan, situated in the Mexico province, where a salt lake merges its waters with a freshwater river. As we mentioned earlier, the circumference of both bodies of water is 70 leagues, and they are 5 or 6 miles distant from them. Mainland. The water around the city is constantly filled with small boats moving up and down. The city has 4 stone bridges, as well as drawbridges in various locations, and is fortified. The gates are not only artificial but also costly, leading from the city to the mainland. Fresh water is conveyed through a walled channel intersecting the salt water. No one is allowed to draw water from it without paying taxes to the king's farmers. This city has over 60,000 houses, divided into islands but connected by large wooden bridges. The marketplace, surrounded by galleries, engages in brisk and constant trade, always bustling with buyers and sellers. Every street has a public inn, each of which houses restaurants serving well-prepared meat and fish, accompanied by an abundance of wine. Trades are organized into various guilds, each with its designated dwelling place. They engage extensively in cacao, a fruit resembling an almond. When powdered and prepared with other ingredients, it gives rise to the excellent drink now known as chocolate. Cacao trees only grow in moist and warm areas and are used so extensively in trade that they function as a form of currency. Among many splendid buildings, their guild hall is particularly magnificent. Within it, 12 judges preside daily, accompanied by numerous officials and servants, hearing and adjudicating all kinds of cases. Next is their chief temple or cathedral, constructed in a quadrangular shape entirely out of freestone. It features 4 portals, opening onto the 4 main streets or triumphal avenues that terminate at the 4 stone bridges. Towering above are walls of remarkable height, adorned with turrets so tall that their spires seem to touch the clouds. Inside are chambers where priests reside, dine, and study, accessible via marble step. These religious individuals are generally of noble lineage, Taken there at the age of 7 to lead a strict life, never venturing into the world until they enter the state of matrimony, the famous Colossus that once stood over the harbour of Rhodes, through whose legs all ships passed, pales in comparison to the stupendous idol Huitzilopochtli, whose head brushes against the arched ceiling of the grand temple. Nearby stand several smaller images, crafted from a mixture of meal and various herbs, blended together with human blood. Dark vaults line walls exclusively traversed by the priests. Above them lie expansive halls, adorned with depictions of their gods, serving as burial places for their gods, serving as burial places for their kings. While Cortez and Montezuma were inspecting the temple, 2 Spaniards abruptly entered one of the chambers. They discovered numerous lamps and torches burning and walls smeared with human blood, 2 inches thick. Overhead hung countless sacrificial knives, and the stench in the place was unbearable. Continuing on, Cortez greatly offended Montezuma and his attendants when he tore down some of their idols and dared to look the king in the face. These people hold such reverence for their kings that no one dares to look up in their presence even once. His council members stand barefooted, stooping with their faces nearly touching the ground before him. They change their attire 4 times a day, and any suit they have worn is given solely to soldiers who have performed outstanding service. The dishes, pots, cups, and other vessels used by the emperor during meals are replaced with new ones each time. In Tenochtitlan, the king possesses 3 grand structures whose magnificence, both in terms of cost and rare architecture, is difficult to match. The first is a residence for all deformed individuals, and the second is an aviary housing various birds and fowl, with nets and surrounded by marble galleries. The third structure is a den for wild beasts, divided into several rooms where lions, tigers, wolves, foxes, and all kinds of 4-legged animals are kept. However, while Cortez had been waiting for 8 months in Tenochtitlan for the messengers sent to the Spanish court to return, he received news that Pampilo Narvaez, on the orders of Velasquez, had arrived with 18 ships manned by 800 infantry and 80 cavalry from Cuba. They were now stationed off the coast of Mexico. Cortez unexpectedly received a command to board the ships unarmed and surrender his authority. Instead of submitting, he compelled Narvaez to relinquish his title and acknowledge him as the superior. Meanwhile, the remaining Spaniards who were in control of Tennessee faced the danger of a general massacre. The citizens resented the oppressions of the Spaniards, who had become very insolent. They enslaved their king, allowed their inveterate enemies, the Tlaxcalans and Guazuzinans, into their city, imposed tributes on them, destroyed their gods, and demolished their ancient idols. In response, the citizens erupted in a tumultuous manner, took up arms, and besieged the Spaniards day and night in their fort, despite Montezuma's attempts to persuade them otherwise. When Cortez heard about the situation, he came to their rescue with the newly arrived forces from Cuba. However, before he could enter, he had to fight his way through, and the Mexicans fiercely resisted, killing 40 of his men and wounding many more. Although 15 cannons with continuous shots created breaches, reducing the number of attackers, the Mexicans quickly filled the gaps with fresh men who climbed over the piles of the fallen. The battle raged fiercely for 3 days. During this time, Montezuma was in the castle with the Spaniards and went to a low window to see if he could order his subjects to retreat. However, the continuous cries deafened their ears, and a shower of arrows and stones blinded their sight, rendering him unable to take any action. Then Montezuma, thinking he would be more easily heard or seen, went to a higher window. Unfortunately, while looking out, he was struck by a stone, and he died 3 days later. In addition to their enemies, the Spaniards suffered greatly from famine. Although they had demolished a tower that had caused significant damage to the castle and set 500 houses on fire, they saw no likely resolution and deemed it best to escape at night over the nearest bridge. Cortez therefore divided the acquired treasures, totaling over 700,000 ducats, among his soldiers. He took Montezuma's son and 2 daughters as prisoners, but not without immense danger and loss. The Tenochtitans attacked him from both sides, and also killed Montezuma's own children. In this final battle, the fighting was intense. Cortez lost 42 horses, 150 Spaniards, and 2,000 auxiliaries. Even after crossing the lake, they were pursued by the Mexicans, who would have undoubtedly slaughtered them all if Cortez hadn't deceived the enemy. He left large fires in several places during the night, creating the illusion of his camps, while he silently escaped. However, the Tenochtitans would have pursued the Spaniards if they hadn't lacked provisions. Cortés sent his treasure ahead through the Colva region to Vera Cruz, accompanied by a convoy of 5 horses and 44-foot soldiers. Unfortunately, they were all killed and used in a thanksgiving sacrifice by the Colvayans. The same misfortune occurred to 12 Spaniards in Tepic, a great city that surrendered to Cortés with the assistance of a mighty army of Tlaxcalans and others. Despite these losses, he conquered Huacachula and Izuca, both fortified with strong walls and gates. In the latter city, he burned over 100 temples used for human sacrifices. He named all the lands he ravaged New Spain, from the city of Tazuco, which he had recently captured with the intention of besieging Tenochtitlan. He dug a broad trench through the lakes, over 3 leagues in length, to bring 13 new ships to Tenochtitlan. The neighboring people, envious that Tenochtitlan would be conquered while theirs remained unconquered, raised an army of over 150,000 men, making Cortés their general. He himself encamped on one corner of the city, while González Sandoval and Pedro Alvarado were assigned to besiege the other 2 sides. However, the besieged fiercely broke out and launched a powerful attack with 5,000 boats, targeting the 13 ships. Yet the powerful cannon inflicted heavy casualties and havoc among them, forcing them to retreat with significant damage. Any prisoners captured in this battle by the Spaniards were feasted upon by the Tlaxcalans under Cortés's orders. On the 7th day, the city was taken, but not without significant slaughter, and the new king was imprisoned. After this great conquest, Cortés decided to explore the territories lying to the south. While preparing for the voyage, he sent 2 ships with an invaluable treasure to Spain. Captured by French pirates, the ships sought refuge in Terceira. There, a tragic accident occurred to the sailors of the larger ship, which carried 2 tigers. Although the tigers had been captured when young and raised among humans, they hadn't entirely forgotten their natural ferocity. One of them broke free at night and tore 7 sailors to pieces, injuring many more. Some had chunks of their arms, calves, and fleshy parts of their thighs bitten off. Several places in America breed tigers that surpass lions in fierceness. So, in places where a significant number of them fetigers gather, even if the land is fertile, it is left desolate and abandoned. However, the baboons that inhabit the woods are more pleasant and less dangerous. Peter Arias relates that his entire army encountered these creatures, which climbed from one tree to another, shrieking and making strange gestures to those who went ahead. They gathered mouthfuls and handfuls of stones, which they threw with precision and strength, rivaling that of a human. When one of these baboons was shot by a musket and fell to the ground, the rest emitted such a horrific shriek that the woods resounded with the noise, instilling fear in the Spaniards. Among several incidents in this skirmish, consider this. A Spaniard aimed his musket at an old baboon perched in a tree, ready to fire. At that very moment, the baboon soldier, to disrupt the shot, removed a stone from its mouth and threw it directly into the man's mouth with such force that it knocked out some of his teeth. Startled by the sudden blow, he lost his target, and the proud foe, showing signs of triumph, went on its way. Meanwhile, while Cortés remained in the territory of Tenochtitlan, now called Mexico. This will conclude Chapter 6. Stay tuned for Chapter 7, and thank you for lending me your ear.